Welcome, all 4 teams. Congratulations on making it so far. I'm just going to go around and introduce myself, as well as let my panelists introduce themselves regarding their preferred gender pronouns. Hi, my name is Hyewon. I'll be your chair. I do not have a preferred gender pronoun. Call me as you wish. To my right.
Mateo, prefer he or they.
Taz, she or they.
SUFE he or they.
I'm Alec, he or they.
Katie, she or they.
Asad, he please.
All right, excellent. Then I have the opening government tell us their preferred gender pronouns and possibly who would be speaking first.
Jeannie speaking first. She.
Marla speaking second, no preference.
All right.
Javier speaking first, no preference.
All right.
Antonio is speaking second, he or they.
Excellent. CG.
Conrad speaking first.
Philip, no preference.
All right. Excellent. Cio. Cio.
Oh, sorry. First speaking and party and no preference.
And Shimon is speaking second and no preference. Thank you.
All right. Excellent. Thank you so much. Without further ado,
Some further ado. We are recording and live streaming, so if people do not want to be recorded in the live stream, maybe they can tell us, so we will. No, everybody finds
all right. Excellent. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome the first speaker to begin the debate track.
English plays the dominant position in the world's language use, especially in the academic area, and also a lot of discussion and forum is made in English. For the developing countries, because they cannot get advanced result of academic area, and also they cannot welcome the foreign companies just because of the language barrier. We say that it is very unfair for the developing countries to have this kind of improvement. So we say that the language plays very important role in this kind of state schools. So we believe that we have to let the primary languages used in instruction for the school's education, so that the students in the developing countries can develop their skills with advanced result of the academic. So we are going to prove you 3 things. Firstly, we are going to prove to you why the English is so important as the tool to get to the advanced result of the academy. And secondly, I'm going to talk about why our mechanism going to work and to improve the education quality and to improve the development of the developing country. And thirdly, the unique impact that given by our models. Now, firstly, I'm going to talk about our model. So we're going to let the schools, starting from the primary schools, to use the English as instruction language for the students. Because we see that in the primary school stage, the children will get easy to accept this language without forgetting their native languages. We're not forbidden use of their native language as well. We also provided the language courses using in their native languages. However, for example, like the science courses and like the mathematics courses, we use the English as their instructive languages. And also, we want to guarantee that the education of their language, like the courses. For example, like in China, because we said in the state school that there are a lot of teachers cannot use the English as their fluent language, give this kind of instructions. So considering this kind of situation, we also welcome to hire some foreign countries, foreign teachers to give this kind of courses. So now I'm going to talk about that, why our policy will improve the education quality of the developing countries and to improve the academic research, encourage more talents exist in our developing countries. We see that in the developing country, because they have the later development of the academic area, because they have focused on economic development in the very early stages. So compared to the Britain and also the US, they're actually starting for their academic area in the very later stage. So we can see that in current state school, the most advanced academic research is given by the English, and it's also developed by this less developed countries. So we say that actually they will be a very inferior for the developed country who do not use the English as their primary language, because they cannot get the access to this most advanced the result of the research. And also, why we say that even if they want to provide it the textbook translated into English, we say that this is not comparable. Why we say so? Because even if we translate the most advanced Western book into the native language of the country use, because we still have this kind of difficulties for the student to understand, because this is not the primary this is not the primary language that they use, and also they also have this kind of barrier to understand what provided in the translated textbooks. And secondly, because they do not have the aware of getting access to this kind of advanced researchers, because they cannot understand English. So actually they are incentivize them to search for this kind of most advanced researchers. I'm going to talk. Yes.
So you're implying under your model that actually those countries like China, the researchers cannot publish in English because they don't know English, or some kind of.
We say that because we also have this kind of Chinese also have scholars to publish their research in English. However, because they do not use the English in their early stage, they cannot to describe their research the results in a very accurate way, because they have this kind of language barrier. Also, they cannot have this kind of incentive to search for this kind of advanced existing research results, because of they have difficulties in understanding that. So we say that this is the problem that we're going to solve. And secondly, I'm going to talk about why in our mechanism we are going to work. Firstly, we say that because we let the students to using language in the very primary stages, so that they have already they have the language, they have the ability to understand their native language, and then they get attached to the English in the very early stage, so that they can use English very well in very early stages, and also to apply them to their academic researches. So we say that providing and then they can fully understand the textbook in the Western countries, so that they can get direct access to this kind of most advanced research result. So actually we guarantee the education for the students to without the difficulties of the language, because we see that compared to the China case, for example, in Hong Kong, the students can fully get access to the comparatively developed academic research, because that they have applied English in very early stages, so that actually they can get fully understand about actually the most advanced academic researchers. And also we say that in the for the impact of thirdly for the impact of our policy for the students, firstly at least they can get the language ability to have this kind of bilingual ability compared to other students, because we say that why there are a lot of students want to have this kind of ability, because why we a lot of parents want to let their children to go to foreign countries for this kind of research, because they say that the Western countries can provide them with the better education quality. However, when we enable them to study in their home countries where they have this kind of ability on their own, actually we're also prevents this kind of talent pool going to the foreign countries as well. And also why we have this kind of incentive for the education, because they have this kind of awareness to search for this kind of most advanced technology. And thirdly, for the nation, because providing the ability to understand and communicate with the foreign countries, especially some foreign corporations, use the English as their main tools for the cooperation, actually will enable them to communicate with each other and to let them perform well in the foreign corporations as well. So for the individual reasons and nation as a whole, we're very proud to propose.
All right, thank you so much. The first speaker of the opening off, please.
Mr. Speaker, the government wants all kids to think in English, to write in English, and to read in English mainly. They cannot claim today that they will have the same knowledge of both languages. They cannot claim that they are going to have both languages in the same perfection. You cannot think in both languages. If you give an education in the primary school in English, they will think in English, they will read in English, and they will write in English, and this is a huge damage for the social unity of our country. 5 points in this opposition. First point, the case of the government is completely irrelevant because it's absolutely unnecessary for 2 reasons. First of all, these countries have absolutely no problem right now in the economic sector. Why is that? We can talk about the BRICS, like Brazil, Russia, India, or China. These countries in the last year have developed an economic growth of around 8 or 10%. Where is the problem in these economies while they have the need for increase the level of English of their population to need this economic improve? They cannot grow even faster. They're growing really, really fast. So there is no problem. But secondly, if this problem could exist, they can create like English schools for just the kids which want to make an international career, for example. China have like 1 billion people. Most of those people will never use English, will never use English in all his work life. They can work in their village, in their city, or wherever they want. If you want to do this, perhaps you can implement just some school for those kids, those families which want their kids to make an international career. So the case of the government is not necessary, and there is a better alternative. Second point, this will be a huge loss of culture. Why is this? As I say, you cannot manage 2 languages the same way. If you study all your life in a language, this will be a damage for the other language. And if a Chinese people study just in English, there will be a loss of the understanding of the Chinese language. And it is an understanding will be in the most educated people. Why is this bad? They will lose comprehension of the Chinese culture, or in the Indian culture, or the Brazilian culture. Why is this bad? You have to understand that you cannot understand the same of a book or the same of a culture when you translate that culture. If you read Confucius in Chinese, you will not understand as well, in English, you will not understand as well the concepts as you do in Chinese. There is difference between the languages, very huge between English and Chinese. You cannot claim that you will understand equally the culture. And this damage is especially big because we are attacking the most well-educated people. That means that the university people, the people which is able to go to school, these people will now have the knowledge of the language necessary to understand their own culture. And this is a principal argument because we think that the enrich of the world, the enrich of the culture of the world is a value in itself, and it goes against the world culture. This motion. Yes, closing.
Do you think this old culture is in any way better than the new culture this country will develop?
No, but this country is not developing a new one. This is they are taking the language, the language of the English, so they are taking the English culture. They will read the history of the England, and they will not read their own history, or at least they cannot read it in the best way possible. Third piece, there will be a problem in the integration between families. In these countries, like they say China or India, there is a huge majority of the population who does not know English. Those people, now their child will be thinking, reading, and writing in English. This will be a problem for the integration within the family, for the integration, for go to the cinema to see a movie in the same language, to do homework together, to see the TV together, to make the comprehension of the world and comprehension of the problems together. This will be a problem for understand the world in the same way within the family. If you change the way a person writes, a person reads, you change the way a person thinks, and this will be a change between the people, the young people in the family and the old people in the family in the way they think. So this provokes a kind of disunion within the family. Fourth point of the position. This will create disunion in the society between the rich and the poor, and between the women and the men. In these countries, there is no such a thing like a complete public education for everybody. In China, almost the half of the population have no education. In India, it's even greater, this rate. In Brazil, the same. So what happens? You are taking the most rich people, which is the people which can afford an education, and they're giving you a different language for the poor people, which will be no able for learning English, so they will still have the Indian or the Chinese. You are creating more inequality, as now they are living in a different ways. But now the rich people is not only living different, they are speaking different, and as I say, they are thinking different from the poor people. This is more difficult for rich people and educated people now to understand the poor people because they will not have the same language. There will be difference between the language of the well-educated people and the non-educated people. This creates a conflict within the state, which is very important for the progress of the society. And not only between rich and poor, so educated and non-educated, but also between women and men. Because in these countries also, the education rate of the women, it's very, very low comparative with the men. So within the same family, within the same brothers, the men will have a great English and probably will be always speaking in English and reading in English and, as I said, thinking in English, while the girls will be doing it in their mother's language. So it creates another discrimination against the women because they will not have the same access to the society than the men. So, for summarize it. Well, closing.
Google and Facebook are making huge efforts to spread internet access all over Asia and Africa. Don't you think that it gets way cheaper to spread education over the internet if everyone knows English already, and so you can get education to people who wouldn't
I don't think so really that it's relevant. You can traduce Facebook to Chinese, but this much greater the damages that I am bringing here. As I was saying, I summarize this. First of all, they have to prove the necessity of this issue as these countries are growing at a 7 or 8% ratio. Second, the loss of culture for these countries will be huge as the most educated people will lose comprehension of their real language and their own history, even in religious matter, like for example Confucius in China. Third, it will make a damage of the union in families. And fourth, it will be a damage for the union between rich and poor people because one will be educating and the other ones no, and between men and women. For all these reasons, very proud to oppose. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and I'd like to invite the second speaker of the opening government.
Dear panels, income disparity and also lack of development in the intellectual system in developing countries and the falling apart of families and also all the cultural appropriation problem they mentioned in this debate are all caused by lack of English education in those developing countries. So before I move on to further engage and substantiate one response to the premise of their case, they believe that bilingual students will forget about their mother tongue. That's why they're going to not have a good communication with their families. But it's not true. Otherwise, Singaporean and Dutch students won't have a good communication with their parents, right? And also, firstly, let's compare the future prosperity of the domestic culture in those developing countries. The thing is, a lot of culture is not even known by the world from those countries, and they got misinterpreted a lot by those English-speaking countries. The reason is that there's no proper description from the local students in those developing countries. We believe that with more English-speaking students in those countries, they can develop more comprehensive theory on their local culture and bring them to the other people through international communication. That's why their culture can be known by the world and their culture won't die out under their paradigm. Also, on the maintenance of the culture, the problem in on the problem of family issues, right? The problem in developing countries like China is that a lot of parents are sending their children abroad to study. That's why you are seeing millions of Chinese students studying abroad instead of studying in their local countries. And this is the point where you truly depart the kids from their family, because the kids won't come back to their countries because they think fundamentally their younger generation can get as good education in their home countries, and those kids will be more likely to seek job opportunities in other countries instead of coming back to seek job opportunities in those multinational corporations. Also, let's talk about problem in developing country one, which is the lack of language competency of the students. That's the lack of academic advancement of these students, which they never engage. The reason for the lack of development in their academic achievement is firstly the textbook. A lot of science book is a translation version of English once, and Vera has told you that a lot of English is dominating the most advanced academic studying theories in this world. That's why that they get mistranslated, or they always cannot keep pace with the international communities. Also, like when you go to higher academies, when you have to read the English reference, you can't understand them. There will be more struggle for the students from developing countries. That's why they have to work more than their counterparts from English-speaking countries to understand. And also, in terms of the news, like they can't get international worldview when they're still very young, because a lot of news simply are written in English. So the urgency of this problem is that the academic achievement disparity has becoming more and more between developing countries and developed world. And also the good universities, like in the United States, they are getting better, but that's why students and better professors are going to better university. This is the human capital loss of those developing countries, and their local academies cannot get better progression. So the students also struggle a lot when they try to compete in international societies. So the comparative is regions like India, who use English as the primary instruction for their students. We've witnessed a lot of good academies from India, and they make a lot of progresses. But however, universities in China, they simply cannot achieve that much development in their country. So however, education is the base for the country's development of the regional success, etc., etc. So without the instruction of English in the education system, students simply cannot get better future development. Closing.
If you think learning English as secondary or as foreign language is so ineffective, why don't you ban local language but still allow people to use it?
You first have to prove to me that why using English as instruction language is mutually exclusive with maintaining your mother tongue, right? That's what I already said. So the mechanism is that students are studying English and from a very young age, and they can shape the English thinking system a lot, and then they can become bilingual. So the whole academic institution will keep pace with the world, and the students will struggle less when they grow up and when they want to go to international cooperation, etc., etc. In conclusion, it's the unique policy to solve this problem in developing countries. Also, on inequality, we believe that in those developing countries, rich parents can send their rich kids to other countries for further study. However, the local students, they can only end up in those institutions without a very advanced education knowledge system knowledge in the local academy. So also we see that the good companies in developing countries prefer to hire students who are very fluent as English speaking, right? So this is why that the poorer kids get poorer and the richer kids get richer, because they are only the ones who can have millions of RMB to go to abroad to self-develop themselves and then to achieve better development in themselves. Also, why is English so why the status quo simply cannot integrate the language from those local areas is that Vera has told you that the English is a more universal speaking language, especially in terms of the higher companies and higher level of companies and higher level of studying. So without English, you lack the ability to have international communications with other students. This is a very crucial soft skills for students to have in terms of their competency and their learning abilities. So we believe that if all the developing countries can introduce a system like Singapore, like Hong Kong, and like India to attract more professors abroad to and keep pace with the international society to develop their own educational system and make their students more better to be embedded in the international society, we think there will be more chances and opportunities for those countries to get better. More importantly, when everyone can study English and good knowledge in the local society, we believe that less inequality will exist in those developing countries to make their people feel ashamed that they can't speaking English, and for those students who feel ashamed when they learn in Chinese in comparison to their richer counterparts abroad. Based on this, very proud to propose.
Alright, thank you so much. Second speaker from the opening up, please.
Dear panel, unsadly, the opening government is completely outside this debate. We're going to prove why, and then we're going to prove why this measure is completely unnecessary, and this brings harmful consequences. What the OG brought here, they say, look, thinking and reading in English permits further development because of two reasons. Firstly, it permits publishing, and secondly, it permits you to be hired in a company. So mainly, thinking in English will be better for them. We say this is a fallacy, and I'm going to size it like this big, because what they say is that if I do not learn in English as my primary language, I cannot be enough well instructed in English to do those things. What we say is really important in this debate, which is that for being a cultural promoter, and in order to be able to know the culture, I have to understand English, these languages as primary. But in order to learn English, use English, speak fluent English, I do not need to learn it. So it's important class between cultural thing learning and the tool English learning. So what we say is tool in English learning is not necessary to be the first language. So because of those reasons, they out of the debate. In preemptive rebuttal to closing, they say, isn't it easier to learn all of those over Facebook and that stuff in English? I'm going to present you some things very useful in my life. First is auto-translate on Facebook. You click auto-translate and you are on the language. And secondly, language, Google Translator, and all that stuff. It's really easy. You do not need to learn in primary English in order to click auto-translate. So no problem on that. All of the government is out of the debate because they missed our first point, our first constructive material. It's important to this debate, which is the lack of justification of this measure, dear panel. We say 5 things on lack of a justification. They failed to prove a problem. What is the problem on China? What is the problem in India? What is the problem in Brazil that obliged them to learn as a primary language? They never proved it. Second thing, this is contrary to tendency. Watch the world. Which people are learning more? Now, is it China learning English as primary language, or is it that English-speaking countries are learning Chinese? This is contrary to tendencies because Chinese and Indians are 2.6 billion of people as primary language. 2.6 billion of people speaking that language. So we say it's both counterintuitive and it's contrary to tendency. And fourthly, they are out of this debate. This is lack of justification because there's a less harmful way to teach English, which is as a second language or as a third language. Look, my name is Fabregat. I'm from Catalonia, and mine is my third language English, and still I'm on World University Debating Champions, and I swear to God, I did never learn that for primary. So I deny the fact that learning as a primary language English is necessary in order to develop my English. I deny it totally. I deny that all people in India, China and Brazil need English as a first language in order to develop themselves. So first, they're out of the debate because of the lack of justification. Secondly, we say, there's a loss of cultural values, and this is a principal argument because there's intrinsic values on the language that can only be promoted if you know the language. I'm telling you, why did we lose some of the values in Greek and Latin, in ancient Greek and Latin? Because we stopped speaking. What we say is that those values would be lost if we don't learn as a primary language in those cultures. And I go further. It is an attack to religious freedom because most of the religions in those countries need the intrinsic values of those languages in order to be able to be developed. So if we lose the way to promote those religions, it's complicated to teach those religions in its essence. So what we say is attack to religious freedom. This is bad for the society. This is principle. We say that in the comparison, in the comparative, they lose because in our world you get both the cultural integration, the cultural values, and learning English. So if you have something open yet?
Prove to us that why students have the incentives to still learn the regional language or regional religions when they feel that the global world is dominated by English-speaking institutions?
Well, I'm astonishingly surprised. I'm Spanish and I have both motivation to learn my language, conserve my culture, and also learning English. This is both motivation, is perfectly normal, but I do not need the motivation of learning as a primary language. 3 more pieces of constructive material. First, worsens social integration. And this goes against parent freedoms to educate their children freely. We say this is completely against the parent's freedom to say my child is going to learn in the language I want. If I promote all schools going English, this attacks as my child if I want to go to my Indian schools, to my Chinese Brazilian schools. So what we say, this is a frontal attack to those rights. Fourth, this is empowers discrimination. You as a government are promoting inequality. My colleague Javier talked about the poor and women, but I'm going to explain how does this work. Why is this? Because of stigmatization. If we have in those countries the perfect accents since the beginning of education, so I have like really my posh accent when I access all of those firms, and I really have a posh accent by those that could not afford a primary education, those who late accessed the colleges, those are going to be discriminated. And you know who are those? Most likely women, most likely poor. We say that's especially harmful because there's a great sector and because it is really important to empower equality, not inequality. We say we live in a world in which those things cannot be promoted. Sorry, you have your chance. So now, last thing in this debate. We say this policy threatens countries' integrity. It threatens all of those countries' integrity. I'm going to explain to you why. Language is part of our societies. It's part of what we are. It's part of our values, what we mean. I feel like my brother's keeper in part because I speak the same language when I'm at home, when I'm with my brother, with my family, with my mother. This empowers a breach of the country's integrity because one single reason. If we promote kids speaking not a language but a foreign language, it sounds to me like imperialism. It sounds to me that many people are going to oppose this thing. And I'm sorry to put my own example, in my country, Spain, unluckily there's many people pushing to avoid Catalonian as a first language. Do you know what they happen over there? They want to go out of Spain. We don't want that. We want that primary language are respected. And we think that this is perfectly possible. And also we can teach English as a second language. The impact of this is really great in this debate. Because even though all of those benefits were exclusively on their wall, we say in our world there's a real threat to countries' integrity, and this is really important to the debate. So the panel on the comparative, they brought something that was totally unnecessary, unjustified, counterintuitive, and harmful for culture. And we explain, you do not need to learn as a primary language in order to be speakingly fluent. If you learn as a primary language, you lose cultural values, you promote inequalities, your social integration is worsened, and you threat the country or integrity. This case is surprisingly irrelevant today, very proud to oppose.
Language can divide, but language can also unite countries. And a huge problem within a lot of developing countries is that they are very racially diverse, ethnically diverse, have very many different language groups and cultural groups. And the communication between all these different cultural and language groups isn't as good as it could have. The division partly stems from a lack of understanding between these groups, and this is what greatly hampers the advancement of these countries. Before I will talk a lot about that, a few points of rebuttal. So we heard there is no problem in the status quo, and then he was citing Brazil and China, which aren't exactly the developing countries that we normally mean when we are talking talking about developing countries. So basically there is a problem in huge parts of this world. Then you can still learn English as a second language basically. So in extremely poor countries with a very bad schooling system, it is way harder to learn a second or a third language than it is in an industrial country like Germany, for example, simply because you have less time attending school, worse teachers, worse resources to learn English. But if we simply make the primary language of education as English, then at least if they had a whole day speaking English, they will learn it somehow, but not necessarily as a second language. So that's why we can change it here. Then, loss of cultural values. So, in my opinion, we weren't really provided with any real and proper examples of values that will be necessarily lost if we do it. What we can agree on, and probably have to agree on inside government, is that there will be a change in culture over time. We believe this change will take some time. It will develop over 2 or 3 generations or so, simply because different people at different times still know their old cultures, know their old languages, and so on. But you can have a multiple cultural identities. There can be a distinct identity, which is basically all these old heritage stuff, which can be preserved with cultural preservation groups like we have everywhere, simply people interested in the dances, in the histories, in the language and so on of their countries, which probably in families will still be taught. But then you can also have a new shared cultural identity, which basically will be my main point, because this is what we will develop. Then we heard things about that some people, rich people, will benefit more than poor. So, the characterization here that 50% of these countries have no schooling at all, I think that's a bit of an exaggeration. Most people still have some schooling, and if not, then that's the one point that basically all of the rich countries are really interested in, at least providing money to have some basic schooling in some countries, so this will change. But what's happening in the status quo already is that the richer parts of these countries send their children to private schools, and guess what they learn there? English, because they know the importance of English. And even if we have English as a second language somewhere else, what will definitely be a difference is simply their English ability and their accents that they have there. And it's simply this different in how you talk and how you sound and so on, is a major barrier for people from lower social classes in getting the proper jobs, which are normally taken by richer people simply because they sound so differently. Once everyone is on a very good level of English, because everyone learns it basically as a primary language, we will have way more social mobility than we had before. No, thank you. So, let's talk about divided countries. A lot of countries, well, if we talk about India again, I think there's about 500 different languages. Most countries have less, but they still exist. These languages often correlate with different ethnic and cultural groups, which often have violent histories towards each other. And what happens here is that there are different narratives about the history of the country in different parts of the culture, basically. Who started some war, who's to blame, who was denying who some rights at whatever time. The reason for this is, and why this is concerned with language, is that in many cases, well, first of all, these narratives are reproduced in the media, in newspapers, in TVs, and so on, and this media is in a certain language. And if I can only speak the language of my media, then I will get only the narrative that my media produces. And if my neighbors a couple of 100 miles further can consume different media because of a different language, they will have a different historical background. So we will, there's less of understanding that could otherwise happen. The problem with this is if we have a country which basically is divided and groups don't like each other, they are more likely to confront each other than cooperate. Politics is often seen as a zero-sum game if you are afraid of someone else gaining too much. And what we need is a shared identity where you simply want to rise up together. This is a problem within countries, in singular countries, because one of the major problems is here that we have basically bad policies and dysfunctional democracies because the lack of cooperation between the groups. We can tackle this problem. By this we can simply have a more efficient government, which will change basically a lot of the problems we have here. But this also works basically on a more global level between different countries, so that countries should cooperate more on an international stage. Closing.
The way people try to accept another group of people is going to be under your paradigm. We're going to communicate with you. We're going to talk to you as long as you can speak English. How can that be real integration of each individual?
Sorry again.
So the way people try to accept another type of people is going to be under your paradigm. We're going to communicate with you. We're going to talk to you as long as you can speak English, right? How can that be real integration?
True. Well, that's the status quo. Basically, that's how the world works. That's the problem we're wanting to tackle, that more people speak the same language so more people can talk with each other. That's exactly my point in this case. So, this isn't only about sharing a certain knowledge about the world. This isn't about having the same history books, which is a major problem, but it's also directly about identity. And identity is based on language. Simply, it's about having the same memories which influence your perception of the world. It's about sharing the same movies, stories, and books and so on that everyone knows, which gives the language for normal communication. It helps people avoid, basically, awkward situations and faux pas simply because you didn't know the culture of the other person. Which normally means, because there's less friction when communicating with someone from the same language, that you are more likely to do it, that you feel closer to these people. Which also means that in most cases, they are simply more of a more empathy, more interested in the cultures, in the groups of people who share the same language as you, simply because it's so much easier for you to be interested in them because all the information is there. This works within a country between different groups, different cultural groups, that you know the problems, but it especially works on the international stage. And I believe it is way more likely that rich developed countries will have, that the populations of rich developed countries will have a larger interest in the populations of poorer countries if they can read the same newspapers, if they can hear the stories directly from these people and not just from some students who went there for half a year to tell them about it. This will basically this will help, this increased empathy will help international cooperation and be a great benefit for the developing world.
Alright, thank you so much. Now let's invite the member of opposition.
It's really surprising that in this room, no one actually talked about what language is in the first place and what development in the first place is. We're going to talk about that kind of thing. That's going to be extremely simple argument that's most directly engaging in the spirit of the motion from closing opposition. 3 things from closing opposition. First, extraneous rebuttal to the unification argument coming from closing government. Second, what actually language is and why you being able to learn in your own primary language is the most optimal way of being able to educate yourself. That can lead to development of human capital, intellectual capital. That's the primary factor of development of the country. Third of all, I'm going to talk a bit about unification and culture, how that is going to be undermined under our paradigm, giving more analysis on OO. But the thing here is that I think, first of all, always was better in terms of completely destroying OG's idea, but I think what was lacking on OO was the engagement of the context of this debate. If Russia and China are not developing country and they are able to do well, that's fine. But usually we will have to talk about and engage in the motions developing world. It follows that countries who are yet to able to, for example, provide welfare and education due to the lack of economic prosperity, which can lead to things like, for example, more tax revenue, ladies and gentlemen. For example, many South African countries, or let's say Cambodia, or these countries, I think that should be the context which opposition OO have to engage in this debate. So first of all, the rebuttal. The first thing which goes to entire government side here is that they have never explained the reason why introduction of English as a primary language of that country is what they have to support in this proposal, right? They have never talked to the uniqueness of this motion in the first place. Then closing government talk about, well, integration is necessary. Ladies and gentlemen, integration is accepting other people's differences, not necessarily assimilation under your paradigm. What's going to happen under their paradigm is normalization of use of English. Presumably, those who are not able to use English or learn English from, for example, poverty or something, is going to be far more discriminated as all talk to you. It follows that there will be less money spent on the education for these individuals, or there will be less money spent in the preservation of the culture of these minority people. Since you talk about there will be, for example, ethnic diversity or whatever, oftentimes in these countries there is a huge economical disparity along with a racial line or ethnic line. Certain racial groups, certain ethnic group is going to be disenfranchised under your paradigm. How can that be unification of the country? So, and also, second thing I want to talk about here is my substantive no, is that what languages and why that is important for people to learn effectively. So, I think the perfect example from opposition side is going to be Japan, that's the country I'm from. The reason why Japan was able to develop its country after World War II, because of the use of Japanese language, which is most suitable and which is most effective for Japanese people, and also which can be used for things like describing the culture of Japan, which can be used as a soft power. Japanese culture, for example, otaku culture or anime culture, manga culture in Japan is now used as a tool of development of Japan. I think this is particularly important. But let's talk about what language is. Language is a system of communication. Words embed conception, notion, many meanings. That's why language is a way of understanding the world. It follows that especially children who grew up in their own native family, community already have their own language native system, which makes it harder for these children to learn something in English, ladies and gentlemen, because they have already different system of understanding many different conceptions. Let's say philosophy, let's say many different difficult literature, many difficult articles, ladies and gentlemen. It follows that this is going to significantly undermine the ability of children to be able to learn effectively in their own language, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to give you many case studies. Let's say in the country of America, Hispanic people, Latin people speak slightly different language from like so-called standard English language. These people, unfortunately, on average, are 30% behind the national average of like entire American students in terms of academic ability, because these students have massive difficulty in understanding, for example, 6 minutes classes every day, ladies and gentlemen. For example, there are so many history. For example, students like American people unfortunately performed badly in IQ test, and that IQ test was done in English, ladies and gentlemen. But in the case of, for example, non-language based or mathematical IQ test, the African people and anybody in the world performed in the same way, ladies and gentlemen. It follows that actually language influences the ability to be able to learn and educate yourself. What is going to happen under your paradigm? Students are going to feel very tired of being exposed to inaudible, incomprehensive classes every day under your paradigm. These students are not able to, for example, endure these incomprehensive classes under your paradigm. It follows that, first of all, these students are not able to learn, but furthermore, second of all, it follows that these students are going to dislike study in the first place, because these students feel massive inferiority whenever they hear their English speaker is talking about. And she also talk about, well, we are able to hire English speaker. First of all, even Japan, one of the most developed countries, are not able to, for example, hire a lot of foreign people. Actually, we had a lot of foreign teachers in Japan, but actually Japanese people are unfortunately terrible at English, like me, ladies and gentlemen. I think this is a terrible problem. It follows that, first of all, this is going to hinder the development of human capital of these students, because these students are not able to learn as much as they would have been able to if they are taught in their own native language. It follows that these children are not able to do things like, for example, having a job and have a stable job, or for example, giving food on the table for their own family. We think this is terrible, and also on a national level, this is terrible, because this is going to create massive poverty, and we think this is going to be fundamentally undermining the capability of these countries to develop its own self. Yeah, sure.
Are you trying to argue that Singapore and the United States have the same culture just because they're both native English speakers?
No. We're not going to say that. We have to first of all prioritize economical development of that nation by their own native language, and after that we are able to foster our own culture, ladies and gentlemen. And also after having economical prosperity, we are able to do things like massive distribution, ladies and gentlemen. The OG seems to be concerned about, for example, poverty and rich people. We are able to mostly address from causing opposition by having economical prosperity, which can do things like welfare system and public education free for every single people under apartheid. So let's talk about the culture. I'm going to give you many examples. As I have clarified from causing opposition, language is a system of communication. Sometimes one word can never be transferred into another language, as Oji correctly pointed out. The result of this introduction of, for example, English culture, English or primary language, leads to the extinction of the culture in many cases, for example, and especially the causing government's paradigm, racial diverse culture, is going to be extinct under your paradigm. But some words can never be transferred into another language. Let's say Korean, let's say Ain language. We think this is going to completely annihilate the culture which they are so concerned about on this space. We causing opposition the only one to identify what language actually is and how we're able to better develop this country, which can liberate these people from the poverty. We are extremely, supremely proud to oppose.
Alright, thanks so much. Now I'd like to invite Governor Whip to conclude the debate for the government side.
On our side of the house, we've presented you with a very important reason as to why English as a common teaching language can be very useful in developing countries. Konrad has spoken about how a shared identity can help, especially in those regions of the world where they are divided, where there are issues with many different ethnicities, different languages, and so on. This has been met with some technical issues on the side of the opposition. So let me first, before I will again point out what are the huge advantages of English, tackle some of the issues pointed out. So first of all, has been pointed out that some people will be able to better speak English, some worse. So while it might be the case that some older generations are currently disadvantaged if we now start with English, this is a problem that is solved within a matter of time. So we can, if we swap now, if we make now the change, in a matter of only a few generations, only a couple of years, everyone will be able to speak English, so this issue dissolves. Then, Konrad has also pointed out actually that there can still be a unique culture be preserved, even though we have a shared identity now, because we think in the same ways in terms of mathematics, in terms of physics, in many things taught in school. For example, we do have already in English a lot of different cultures represented. For example, in terms of literature, we do have English writers. We also have Indian writers who both write in English. We even have African writers such as Chinua Achebe, who writes in English and still presents a very unique part of African literature. So only because the language is the same doesn't mean that the culture is the same, as we can also see in terms of, not yet, sorry. Also, as we can also see, for example, in Singapore in comparison to the US, to Australia. For example, in the Netherlands, where people are also quite extremely capable of speaking English, they still have preserved their culture. So by no means speaking more than one language and learning maybe one language before in school and the other more at home is in no way a sign that one will for sure lose one's own identity. So, however, why does the addition of a shared identity, the issue of a shared identity, actually before that. So, and then if we say that it's first, if they argue, first they should learn their own language and prosper economically. First of all, this can be very difficult in terms of in the globalized world, when multinationals present a large amount of the labor offered in a country. Not speaking English can be a disadvantage, can, for example, mean that one is not entitled to higher positions, maybe in terms of management, maybe in terms of services, which can provide a huge opportunity for those countries to increase economically. If we only just in our own languages, we first of all have to make sure that all the education is provided in that specific language. In those in different regions, in different languages, and we cannot ensure that multinationals, for example, have as little friction to include natives in those countries first. Now, if you want, opening.
Yeah, I would beg for engagement on justification, religious freedom, equality, promotion, freedom of the parents, of threat to the country's integrity, but guessing that's not going to happen. Sure. Please engage with the button of proof. Why is this the unique way?
Yeah, so first of all, I've already shown you why culture is not an issue, why we can preserve our culture. Second, religion. First of all, many religions already exist in different languages. We do have the Bible in German, we have it in English, we have it in Dutch. Third, we can still for example, in Muslim countries, there can still be read the Quran in the original language and still have another language as the main language. So by no means religion is necessarily tied to culture, is tied to language. And even then, we won't lose our the language spoken at home is by no means lost for sure if we speak it like after school with our parents and so on. So we can also retain those cultural traits which are unique to language. So now, the most important thing? So why do we and then again, the division in the society in terms of rich and poor has also been refuted, because right now we do have this division. We do have international the elite in some developing countries who are sent to international schools, who later on go on to visit international universities, who are heavily in favor, heavily entitled because they do know English. So now if we make sure that most parts of the country, or basically all the parts, and every student, does know English, we do have an equal playing field for all parties, and we do make sure that actually disadvantages right now disappear. So now, but why is this shared identity such an important feat we can achieve with this, by this common language? Conrad has shown you that there are many developing countries who are extremely torn apart because they have, for example, different narratives in terms of history. There might have been tribal wars. There might have been wars between regions. There might even be neighbors who don't get along because they do have different religions. And if we unite them, if only by common grounds in school, we do offer possibilities for people to get in contact. They can talk in school in the same language. The barrier of their mother tongue disappears, at least in school. This offers, for example, the possibility for them to engage in breaks in school, after school. And if they have now been separated by their language and by their very strict cultural borders, those borders are dissolved in a pretty large way by a common identity. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm highly surprised of how the government is assuming that everybody can go to school in countries like India. Can you talk to me about the injustice for poor people and for women in these countries?
So first of all, it should be our general interest to provide schooling everywhere, in every part of the developing countries. Those are the most important feat for their development. So this should be the main priority anyway. So this issue, if it still exists, should dissolve. Third, another second answer to this, if we have English, we can even have international, other countries provide their textbooks to them because they are already translated. We don't have the issue of having to provide every small region with their own textbook in their own native language. So actually, we can make sure that education is faster, and education in general is anyways the main of main importance right now. So this common shared identity of which I was talking about, therefore makes sure that those ethnical, those cultural, maybe religious differences in those countries can disappear by making sure they all enjoy the same language as in school. It can therefore make sure that there are less issues arising in terms of culture. It can make sure that they have a common economy where they can prosper together. It makes also those people. It makes sure that they all enjoy the same education, for example, the same history books. So in this case, we not only provide economic benefits or academic benefits, as OG pointed out, but actually we can make sure that those nations are united in a common purpose, in the purpose of education. And this makes sure that less visible issues that may be holding back those countries can be dissolved, and therefore make sure that those developing countries develop even faster, make sure that they make the leap and improve their everyone's well-being in those countries. So because we could show that even English is a trait for the entire society, it is better for developing countries, and I beg you to propose.
Alright, thank you so much. Now I'm inviting the last speaker of this debate, and I'll quit.
Here is too small for me. I'm going to answer 3 questions in my speech, and rebuttal will be integrated in my argumentations. Firstly,
whether or not the learning English as a primary language is the absolute way to simply learn the English, because we cannot see any logical mechanism coming from the opening comment side which show that why learning English as a secondary or foreign language is not the best way, because we already are EFL and we already have the ESL who are the very good speakers and also who can learn very much. You are actually against your identity. Secondly, I'd like to talk about what kind of impact to other parts of education except English we can expect under the both partner, which is very exclusive extension coming from my partner. We say, okay, that's all. Thirdly, I'd like to talk about, finally, what kind of the impact on the economy in the developing country we can expect on both partners. Because we believe that the CO is the only team which actually focusing the development of the developing country, but not just talking about unification of the culture or how to improving in culture is important, because we are talking about uniquely developing country, we should talk about the development. But before that, just one point of independent rebuttal to the closing government side. So their argument is very simple. Because we need to unify the diverse culture, that's why we should introduce English as a primary language. 3 points of analysis. Number 1, why English? Because you can also unify that language as local language, which will also be feasible and more effective. But secondly, we say the thing is that the reason why some cultures still have the conflict between the regionally and also in the different culture is not because they don't have the common language, but rather they don't have the incentive to learn other different culture, right? That is actually why what we should do is that not to let them feel antipathy within each other, but to let them to learn how learning other race or regions or culture is important. But thirdly, we say we think that not by the English, but rather learning the local language is much better to learn each other's culture because it's based on the local language. Before my first argument, yes, what's yours? POI opening.
Debaters in open category generally have higher speaker scores than EFL ones. Do you think it's because that we are just bad at debate, or it's due to language barrier?
Okay. There might be the massive number of different factors. So that if there might be also disadvantaged English, but also there might be other, I don't know, but we hope there's nobody here, but there might be biased adjudicator, right? So that's why we say, anyway, that was the comment to the motion. So firstly, thank you. So firstly, what I want to introducing the primary is the best way to learn English. We see that very simple logic coming from the opening government side that learning English as a primary is the best way. But we do not think so. Why is this? This is my parent already told you. There's also still the option as the secondary and foreign language, right? The reason why the system in Japan is failing is not because we introduced English as a primary language, but rather the government failing in the method in the teaching English. They don't just inputting the grammar and wording, etc. to the student. They do not know how that speaking English is important. That is actually why introducing English as a primary language is not the best way. Rather, there might be other root causes. But we say, even if we buy that introducing English primary language is the only way to teach students to learn English, we think the government side is already actually committing suicide. Why is that so? Because on the other hand, they're allowing individuals to learning and speaking English in the family, neighbor, and also seeing the TV program which is based on local languages, right? Therefore, we say if we buy the opening government side argument that students now cannot learn English because there's still local language in school, they're already also committing the suicide. So second argument, no, sit down please. Second argument, what kind of impact to other education except English we can expect under the both program? So the argument coming as my personal language, we say learning in the local language is much better to actually incentivize students continuously to learn other things. We say that extension is very exclusive, not rebutted by the closing government side. But let me take a look at the point coming from the opening government side that they can attract the better professor because we introduce the primary English as a primary language. Yes, it would be true. It would be also one factor which can invite better professor. But there's also massive number of the different factors. For example, Tokyo University, which is not Keio, are actually using the taxation coming from the people in Japan. Also try to attract the better professor from foreign country by improving the facility and also the payment to the professor, and also sit down please, that increasing the amount of the books and research paper in library, etc. We see there might be massive number of the factors you can attract the better professor. But thirdly, let's take a look at what kind of impact to the economic development we can expect under the both paradigm. Because as my personal already tells you, we see that local individual cannot learn other part of the very important education like mathematics or, for example, cultural things, history, and etc. in the prime English as a primary English. We say that was actually directly harming the future human resources because they are comparatively incapable. But even if we assume their paradigm drastically changed the citizens' mindset and let everybody be very good speaker like the EPL we had in top round, we say that then it is not time for the developing country to introduce the English as a primary language. Why is that so? Because the timing that the country needs that the English as is an important thing is that they own the tertiary industry, which actually focusing on the e-commerce, which are focusing on interaction between the foreign countries, right? But because we are talking a developing country, which is still on the primary industry or secondary industry, we believe that the learning English is not the top priority for those countries to improve the economy based on two reasons. Because number one, most important thing in that area is that actually not developing the English, but rather developing domestic market, and also second, inviting the foreign investment by showing that how the local culture is very important, right? But in the government side part, because everybody somehow came to be the non-local language speaker, they can actually get for example, survey of the local consumer who is very elderly, who can only speak local language, and they cannot see what kind of demand the local market have, meaning that they can actually export the good commodity to the local market, and also they can actually invite the foreign people to tourism, and also can show how local culture is important enough to be invested. So absolutely, we are happy to vote. Thank you.
Thank you.
Whoops.
Thank you.
For a wonderful debate. Judges, I think we have a separate.
Thank you. Thank you.
Debate.
How do you